Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of European Report. My name is Tomas Sandell. I'm the founding director of European Coalition for Israel. And together with me in my virtual studio today, I have two guests. Welcome to CEO Markus Sheff of Impact SC, currently in Jerusalem, if I understand it correctly. And here in Helsinki, in the National Parliament, Member of Parliament Peter Östman, very much welcome to the program.
Thank you.
The theme of today's program is Palestinian hate education. This was a phrase that we used over the years to explain some of the more problematic contents of Palestinian education, and something which is being funded by us European taxpayers, and which makes it even a more compelling case for us. Are we actually fueling hatred and conflict in the Middle East, or are we building the foundation for a coexistence and peace in the future between Israelis and Palestinians? My two gentlemen and panelists here today will help us to answer that question. And obviously, I will start this with you, Markus. You have been a champion on raising these issues in national parliaments around the world. For many years, you have also been here to Helsinki. And I should also say that you are the CEO of Impact SE, which is the Institute for Monitoring Peace and Cultural Tolerance in School Education. But if I start and we go back to the beginning, what exactly is hate education, and how can this be accepted in Western society, where we promote tolerance and peace? And still, this is a reality. And maybe you could also give some examples to kick us off. Please, Markus.
Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it. Appreciate all the work that you do. It is so valuable, so important, and so appreciated. And as always, it is great to be working with you. So, first of all, I will say, hate education is one of those things that we recognize it when we see it, but we also have real standards to judge it by. Those are the UNESCO derived standards of peace and tolerance. So they are no hate, respect for the other, for the individual other, peacemaking is the way to resolve conflict. There are very clear standards about what they are. And, when we look at Palestinian textbooks, we judge them through those standards. I will say that, firstly, important to know, they were totally reformed in 2016. And we expected that reform would create an improvement. But actually, those textbooks got worse. So what does that mean? It means that peace, the idea of peacemaking, is not in these textbooks presented as preferred or even possible. Peace agreements and proposals with Israel, which previously appeared, were removed. There is one small mention of the Oslo Accords, but it is doctored, and children are not encouraged to follow that as a path to reach peace. So the question, Thomas, examples, what does this mean? Well, Jews are called liars and fraudsters. They are accused of being the enemies of Islam. They control, they are told, finance, media, politics. Children in year one, so that 6-year-old children are taught a reading exercise using the letter Ha for first grade. And that includes the word shahid or martyr, hujum, which means to attack, and harab, run away. 6-year-olds. 9-year-olds learn mathematics not by adding, apples or oranges, but by adding martyrs from the first intifada and from the second intifada, and they are asked, how many martyrs do you have? Newton's second law of motion, as an example, Thomas, which children are taught in schools. In this case, at 12 years old, they're taught using a slingshot, which is encouraging them to involve themselves in violence. Palestinian teenagers taught that death is a right and that dying is better than living. Salafi ideas and extremely frightening ideas that young people are being told not to have good, happy lives, but to consider, life something which, can be thrown away in order that you, in an act of violence, die as a martyr. They're told to sacrifice their blood to eliminate the usurper. They're also told that they get 72 brides in paradise if they, commit these attacks. And the Munich Olympic massacre, an example of terrorism being justified because they are told that it was an attack on Zionist targets abroad. So, many, many examples of what it is in this Palestinian curriculum that we can clearly see as hateful.
Well, thank you, Marcus, for giving this introduction and also some examples, but because for most of us, of course, there's no way of us of studying or being aware, they're in Arabic and few of us have an understanding of that language. But Peter Östman, member of the Finnish parliament, for you, this is nothing new. People like Marcus and myself and others have raised this issue with you a number of times. And this raises another question: how can this go on? On a principle level, we have national parliaments who control their governments and the governments who then make the European institutions accountable. This is something that has been going on for around 2 decades, as far as I'm concerned. And it's perhaps only now that we see a light in the tunnel. We will come back to that, whether we can be optimistic or not. But Peter, can you give some explanations to why this is the case?
First of all, Tomas and Marcus, thanks to both of you that you brought this challenge into my lap a few years ago. I can tell you that it has been quite a challenge to work with. And yeah, let's say that we can see a little light in the tunnel, but I wouldn't say that we are yet satisfied with the situation. And of course, I'm fully aware of the situation. And we all who are friends of Israel, we know that there has been a concern over the content of the textbooks in the Palestinian schools for at least over 20 years, I would say. And this problem is not new. And despite the fact that it has been taken up several times over the decades, not much has changed. Actually, the situation has become worse, as we all also heard via Marcus. And what we can see from Impact's report also. And secondly, for example, several members of the Finnish parliament brought up the issue already 21 years ago in the Finnish parliament, asking whether Finnish development cooperation funds are being used to fund textbooks with anti-Semitic content. And Finland has been funding Palestinian textbooks directly, even directly since 1999, but lately more indirectly as a support to what they call for development of the educational sector of the Palestinian Authority. And the question has been also voiced in the European Parliament already in the beginning of 2000. So I would say that many politicians all over Europe has been aware of this problem for decades. But then the question is that how can then the EU and its member states accept Palestinians' incitement to violence and hatred? That's a good question. Of course, it's not acceptable. I would like to be clear on that. It's not acceptable. But who is then responsible? Both the governments and on the national level, but also EU. Both national governments and on the international level, EU. And what is then the responsibility of the national parliaments? Right now, I am part of the opposition in the Finnish parliament, which means that when we have a majority government, They don't listen much to what we say from the opposition. Sometimes they listen, but when it comes to this issue about Middle East and Israel, they rather are more silent than giving any answers. But what is my responsibility as a single member of the Finnish Parliament? I have both the right, but also the task to raise questions and issues like this, and to follow up how things goes on, and also in the future.
Thank you, Peter. And it's almost a bit depressing to realize, for those of us who have been around almost for 2 decades campaigning on this issue. But of course, there is the other side, and I choose to be optimistic today. And Marcus, you are, of course, very much aware of that before the former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Federica Mogherini, left office after a 5-year term, finally, one of the last things she did was to call for an inquiry, finally. And these last few months and weeks have been very, I would almost say, dramatic as it comes to the presentation of that inquiry. Can you illuminate us a little bit? Where are we at now? What does the EU inquiry actually tell us?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, and first, dramatic is the word, Tomas. We have felt that for several months this report was finished, and that the European Union was not releasing it, even though the work had been done. And this, bear in mind, is after such a long delay. It was a 2-year delay, not including the theoretically finished report. But the drama was when a German newspaper published an exclusive saying it had got hold of a copy of the report, and that was followed by another one, and then a third one, and finally they saw fit to publish that report. And what the newspapers said was actually confirmed by our also getting hold of a copy of it. So the report confirms that the PA curriculum contains material which is hateful, as I said at the beginning of this call. Incitement to violence, it protracts the conflict, and it rejects peacemaking. I have to say there are serious shortcomings in the report. There are omissions, there are apologetics and justifications, but the bottom line is it says there are anti-Semitic tropes in the Palestinian curriculum. It celebrates terrorists. It rejects peacemaking, rejects reconciliation. It incites young people to violence, to jihad, to martyrdom, and it delegitimizes Israel. So all these things are in the report. And I think very interestingly, 2 days ago, EU Commissioner Varhelyi, who is in charge of that part of the commission that asked for the report, stated that they need to look at whether they are going to restrict funding until these changes have been made.
Wow, that is that if nothing is a positive message, and I could of course add that the president of the Commission made a similar statement already earlier in June to say that the European Union cannot accept giving funding to anyone who would reject Israel's right to existence. So this is of course encouraging, but it also brings us back to the responsibilities for national governments. Our last European report, we had the EU ambassador to Israel, Mr. Ambassador Geoffrey, and I brought up this issue again with him. And EU officials have learned a very elegant way of replying to this question, and that is to say that the EU does not directly fund any Palestinian textbooks. And of course, those of us who know a little bit about school education, it's not the printing of the school textbooks in itself that is the problem, but of course those who are putting them together, and the curricula and the ideology behind textbooks. And as a Finn, both of us, Peter and myself, have to feel a little bit ashamed that knowing the central role of Finland for quite some time already, to be exact, for 2 decades in financing directly, and not only financing, but overseeing the development of curriculums and education in the Palestinian territories. And so, Peter, this brings us to a very, very critical question. How can this be, and what can be done? You have done already, you raised this issue, but of course, at a certain point, we have to bring this issue to a close also here in Finland, again, with the help of Markus and other good people. But what are your comments on the role of Finland in this issue?
Well, I hope that you have a little bit sense of humor left, although you have been living for a long time in Helsinki. But when I know that you were born in Kokkola, then I think that you might understand if my answer would be how we would solve the problem in Österbotten. It would be behind the sauna. But since we cannot do this neither in the parliament nor in the government, then we must use words. We must write and repeat and repeat and repeat until we can see the change. You both, Markus and Tomas, you know that I got more knowledge and awareness of this problem in Finland when it was rose again in the spring 2018. I think it was in the spring when Markus and you visited the Finnish parliament. And I got the report of this issue. And I remember that I immediately sent a copy to the minister who was responsible for this, Mrs. Virolainen. But since I didn't get any response from her, then I also sent another copy to the Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and also to the Minister of Finance. There were three parties in the Finnish government at that time. And then it took a while, and I didn't get any response either from the Prime Minister. So I got a little bit worried, but then I was participating into an evening event where the Prime Minister also were. So I raised up the question, and he said, sorry, that now I have been 2 or 3 days in Brussels, so maybe that I have missed your email. Please send it again. I did so, and I know that at least it led to the actions that these 3 party leaders and ministers, they spoke together and also set a little bit pressure to the minister who was responsible for this. But sad to say, it didn't bring forth any better fruits yet. The response of the minister, when I raised a written question to her, was that she answered me that, for example, that there is so far no international impartial research on the new Palestinian curriculum. Moreover, the response stated that Finnish funding has not been used to reform the content of the curriculum and not the textbook production. So we cannot, as Finnish politicians, and I can't go to the printing company who is cooperating with the Palestinian Authority and blame them for the content. There must be some political power behind this. And since the Finnish government is participating into the international work group, even as chairing the group, I would say that Finland has the most and greatest responsibility for what kind of content are printed into these textbooks. Although they can say that, no, we are not planning the books or the content, that belongs to the Palestinian Authority. But since we are in charge of how we will develop the school system within the Palestinian areas, then we are also responsible for the content.
Absolutely. Markus, would you want to elaborate or comment more on the Finnish involvement?
Well, I just to say that I think Peter absolutely summed up the situation, and I would also like to say how important and absolutely essential to this struggle Peter's work has been over this period of time, and all those who wish to see the eradication of hate in these textbooks thank Peter. I would also, just add, the obvious, which is textbooks stand at the center of the educational system, especially in the Middle East, where you have one book, one grade, one subject. There is no other educational material. So it is not like some Western countries where, apart from a textbook, there is other material the teachers give out, or sometimes no textbooks at all, and the teachers create their own educational material. That is not the case in the Palestinian Authority or in most other Middle Eastern countries, except for Israel, actually. And so this is an extremely authoritative piece of work, this textbook. Children know it. It has the seal of the state on it. They are expected to work in the book. They write in the book. They take it home. It is an absolutely essential part of them. Everything else in the educational infrastructure, the place they study, the person who is in charge of them when they study, the school, the teacher, is around this material in these textbooks, which they are examined on in order to move into the next year. So to say, as we have all heard, we have nothing to do with the textbooks, we are giving financing to other elements of education, is just not serious. It's as if you would go into a hospital and a doctor would say, listen, you're financing the hospital and you're financing the doctor and the nurse, but ignore the fact that we are injecting poison into the patient. Nobody would accept that, and nobody accepts that with textbooks either.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, Marcus. And we are coming to a close, and obviously these type of reports are only a discussion beginning, and it's been so helpful to have you, Marcus, and to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak, because you've been doing this research for such a long time. But the obvious question sometimes, is what about Israeli textbooks? How would you answer or say, is there similar incitement on the Israeli side?
So, first of all, I would say we look at textbooks across the Middle East, from Tunisia, across Africa, up to Turkey, down to the Gulf, and in Iran. And we don't compare any textbooks with any others. But we also obviously look at the Israeli curriculum. It's the curriculum we probably look at more closely than any other, because it's just, we are based in Israel, and so it is important to us. And I would say the following. The Israeli curriculum, well, obviously clearly meets UNESCO standards of peace and tolerance. It's specifically on two issues which you always focus on. Peacemaking is a key element of the Israeli curriculum. Just as the Palestinians are in a conflict, so is Israel. And this argument that the Palestinians cannot, teach peace when they're in the conflict, that's not true in so many other places in the world. It's not true in Israel either. Israeli children are taught that peace is the most important option and that war is the least good option. Now, in relation to Palestinians, the Palestinian identity is covered in the Israeli curriculum comprehensively, not just religion and not just culture, but also the national identity and the politics. The Israeli civics textbook, which is taught to higher grades, talks extensively about the Palestinian view of their national struggle, views of what happened in 1948, which impart the Palestinian narrative. There are many Israeli parents who think the Israeli curriculum is far too left-wing and far too liberal. But one thing it clearly does not do is incite children. It encourages them to peaceful means of resolving conflict.
Yes, of course. I think it was important to get that straightened out, because obviously from the other side, you can always raise that question. And I think your answer is very much to the point. Thank you, gentlemen. This is an issue which has been going on, as both of you pointed out, for more than 2 decades. I don't think it will end tomorrow. The question is that if change of policy from the EU side, is it too late already? We have Palestinians who've been going through these school systems for the last 20 years plus, And of course, we see it in terms of radicalization throughout the Palestinian territories. And as Europeans, we do have a responsibility of having allowed this to happen for such a long time. But let us remain positive, let us believe in change, and let us applaud the statements made by the EU Commissioner for External Affairs and the President. And I believe by Peter, you wanted to add.
Yeah, a short comment I'd like to add to this. But although I have sometimes I feel I have having a negative attitude when it comes to the Finnish policymakers and politicians, but if we look upon the European level, then one statement comforted me much when I heard that Manfred Weber, who is the leader for the biggest parliamentary group in the European Parliament, said that if the Palestinian leaders get EU funding for school education, then European values must be respected there too. So this is kind of giving light in the tunnel, that showing that we might have a future, but it comes very much up to the European Parliament at what kind of decision and the lines they will give us. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think the conclusions we can draw is also that there is a momentum. We cannot give up at this moment. We have to see this through, and let us hope that say within a year we can see EU aid being given on conditionality of following these guidelines. So, gentlemen, again, thank you for this most enlightening conversation. Next month, we will have the Vice President of the European Parliament, Nicola Beer, who is also the chair of the European Parliament Working Group Against Anti-Semitism, discussing the issue which is directly related to today's conversation on radicalization and anti-Semitism in Europe and what we can do to change the tide. But for today, we say thank you and wishing you from Finland a very happy midsummer, and we'll see you next month. Thank you.
Happy midsummer and shalom.
Shalom, shalom.